Welcome, everybody. It's wonderful to have you here. I'm going to let people come in and we'll get started in a few moments. Maybe as we let people in, I invite people to use the chat to say hello, to just connect with each other. Most of the people are people from the TBZ community, but some people are friends and guests. So just take a moment to connect with each other using the chat. That would be great. Perhaps if you feel like sharing something you're feeling grateful for this evening. Evening here in Boston. It's a little earlier in LA, but I'm seeing the sunset. Okay, I think I'm going to start. It's 7:02. People will continue to arrive. So welcome, all of you. It's really wonderful to be with all of you this evening. I feel really honored to have here my dear friend, Rabbi Sharon Brous. Rabbi Sharon Brous and I have known each other for, 25 years now? It's 1999, was it, when we met in Jerusalem, when none of us were rabbis. I wasn't even a rabbinical student yet. And I love sharing the story, and some of you might have heard that Rabbi Brous was my first chavruta ever. It's the first time that I ever study in chavruta, in a pair with someone at a Beit Midrash, at a house of study, with your Talmud open and all the books. Was with Sharon, and she was there when I was trying to decide if to apply to rabbinical school, and really inspired me and helped me in the decision. And it's been an incredible joy and honor to be in this relationship for over 25 years now. Very deep friendship. Uh, and now we are so blessed to be again together in this program that both of us are as part of the Hartman Fellowship. So we're spending a lot of time together, studying again together, and in so many other opportunities. So I'm just very, very excited that I get to bring you here to TBZ, even though it's on Zoom, and I'm actually at home, not at TBZ, but to bring you to my community. I hope soon I can bring you to really here physically. I would love to welcome you, but thank God for Zoom. We can start with this. And I told you, Sharon, told you that we made the book read for the community, and really, I believe many in our community got to read it, and people, I hope, are coming with curiosity and questions and thoughts. We also made it our learning on our Wednesdays class that I have with the parents during our Bet Rabban program, which is our educational program for the learners, for the kids. And we have been studying the book. I think I shared with you that we just finished chapter 2, and we have been doing this for 6 months. So we're really reading it slowly and learning together. And everybody in our community has been sharing with me how meaningful it has been to read. So I'm super excited to have you here. For those of you who are here, because I expected we'll have a large group, we will use the chat to communicate. I will try to get to the questions and ask them to Rabbi Brous during our conversation. We'll try to leave time at the end for questions, and I really welcome questions, both based on the conversation that Rabbi Brous and I will have today, or any questions you may have from reading the book. So again, welcome all of you. It's great to have you here. So I'll say that there's a lot in common in our communities and in our rabbinate. We have been both are incredibly blessed to lead communities where at the center and at the core is both um, really joyful worship and love of Torah and of singing and of dancing and of building intentional community, and also the work of social justice. And it's been, I think that by reading your book, I was reminded how much in common both our rabbinates, our journeys, and our communities have. So let me start asking how this book came to be. Why did you write this?
Thank you. Thank you, Rav Claudia, my dear beloved friend. And I feel just so honored and grateful for this chance to be with your community. And I do hope to visit you in person at some point at TBZ. So thank you for having me this way, though. And thank God for the technology that makes it so we can actually connect and feel close to each other, even from afar, for all the terrible things that these devices have brought into our lives. I'm really glad for this ability to connect in this way. So the story of the book is that about 12 years ago, I started to notice that we were at that time almost 10 years into building our community here in Los Angeles. And I started to notice that lots of people who were coming in to see me were talking about loneliness. It was a shift. It was different from before. They were talking about how lonely they are, about how they didn't feel like anyone in the world really saw them or understood them, a kind of isolation that people were describing even inside their marriages, inside their very loud homes filled with lots of people running around all the time, but where they felt sort of fundamentally alone. And I was curious about what's going on. And now I will say that after Jonathan Haidt's book that came out last year and Dr. Vivek Murthy's work, our former Surgeon General, who's extraordinary, now there's a lot more in the kind of ether about loneliness. But at the time, it was hard to find material to help me understand what was going on with loneliness. I found a book by a guy named Dr. John Cacioppo about the science of loneliness. And some of you probably know this work well, but he was one of the first people to say things like loneliness not only affects our spirits, but also has a profoundly deleterious impact on our bodies. So he said that loneliness is essentially the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day in terms of impact on lungs and heart. These kind of astonishing statistics. I literally called up one of my friends who's a doctor, an oncologist, and I said, is this possibly true? Can loneliness actually increase inflammation in the system and cause early onset Alzheimer's and heart disease and other? And he said, it's true. It's actually true. It's just something we don't talk about. So I started to realize that loneliness was not only hurting our spirits, but it was really hurting our bodies. And at the same time, I reread Hannah Arendt's Origins of Totalitarianism. I had read Hannah Arendt in college, but I hadn't read it, since. And she writes that loneliness and social alienation are a precondition for tyranny, that a totalitarian regime cannot take hold in a society in which the people know their neighbors.
Mm.
And this just absolutely terrified me because I thought that we might be barreling toward the edge of the abyss. And I thought, okay, it's threatening our spirits, it's threatening our bodies, it's threatening our democracy. What can we do about it? And it was at this point that I remembered a text that I had encountered when I was in seminary at JTS in New York. And I encountered a very obscure Mishnah, the Mishnah that's become sort of the centerpiece of the book from Midot, and from Midah, sorry. And the Mishnah speaks of this ritual at the Temple Mount. And I think most of you have read the book, but if you haven't, because thank you, Claudia, for really encouraging your people to read my book. But if you haven't, the Mishnah describes this ancient ritual where on pilgrimage days, also anytime people would go to visit the temple, but especially on pilgrimage days, they would ascend to Jerusalem. Jews would come from all across the land 2,000 years ago, ascend to Jerusalem, ascend the steps of the temple. They would enter through this beautiful, elaborate arched entryway. They would turn to the right and circle around the perimeter of the courtyard of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the holiest place in the holiest city on the holiest of days. Except Misha Ero Davar, someone to whom something had happened, someone who had experienced a loss. And those people would still go up to Jerusalem and they'd still climb the steps, but they would go through the same entryway and circle to the left when everyone else is coming from the right. And, the Mishnah describes this incredibly powerful ritual in which someone who's coming from the right sees someone who's coming from the left and looks them in the eye and says, Malach, tell me what happened to you. Tell me about your heart. And this person would say, I am bereft, I am bereaved, I am ill. I lost my parent, I lost my sibling. I'm worried about my child. I just feel like there's nobody in the whole world who knows me. I'm really scared and I don't get the test results back for 3 more days. Whatever the great agony is in their lives, they would say it out loud to a person who was most likely a stranger. And that person would respond saying some kind of blessing. May the one who dwells in this place hold you with love as you navigate this difficult moment. And I realized, coming from the framework of the spiritual, physical, and social crisis of loneliness and re-encountering this text, that what it was doing was essentially offering us guidelines for how to navigate a time of profound loss and loneliness. And what it was saying is, it is precisely in the moment that you are most inclined to retreat from each other that you have to turn toward each other. Because the person who's there for the pilgrimage or there to visit this most sacred site in this most sacred city, the last thing in the world they want to do is turn away from the ritual of circling, leave their friends and family, and step aside and go check in on a stranger who's crying. That's totally counterintuitive. It feels almost impossible to imagine. And yet that's why they're there. That's the reason that they're in that place on that day. And the person who's brokenhearted, and we've all been this person at some point in our lives, every bone in our body tells us, like, don't even get out of bed today, let alone go up to this place where there are hundreds of thousands of people and they're all literally walking in one direction and you're going to walk in the other. And yet the tradition says you go and you show up. And not only do you show up, you are not allowed to turn to the right like everybody else and pretend that you're okay and just be part of the journey of the day, because you're not okay. And I realized that the text was teaching us how the text and the ritual, how to build sacred companionship in a time that really pulls us toward isolation from one another. And so I gave a sermon about it that Yom Kippur, that Kol Nidre. It was about 12 years ago, and it was called the Amen Effect. And it was what is the impact of someone standing up in a room and saying, Yitkadal v'yikadash Shemei Rabbah, my heart is broken, and a whole community of people who might know or not know that person responding, saying, Amen, I see you. I'm just going to hold you with love. And that's one example of how we've kind of modernized this ritual. That's one that we still hold on to. The practice of Kaddish is old, but we still use it in our time. But there are all these other ways that we need to devise of finding each other in these moments of greatest darkness so that we aren't forced to navigate these things in loneliness and alone. And so the Amen Effect is essentially a call in a time of so much brokenheartedness and anguish, to take that instinct to pull away and instead turn toward and build circles of sacred connection and sacred responsibility toward one another through compassion and through care for one another. And the last thing I'm going to say about it right now is just, I think Danya wrote in the chat that that you read the book through Shiva and Shloshim, and I want to say to you, I'm so sorry for your loss, and thank you for sharing that with me and actually with all of us here. And what you did by writing it here is exactly what I'm talking about. It's not pretending that you're like everybody else when you're really not, because when you're in the immediate aftermath of a loss, the world looks one way to many people, and it just looks totally different. People describe like the veil being lifted, and you just have this different experience of reality. And so saying to people, I'm here with you, but I'm not exactly like you today, is really powerful. So I hope your loved one's memory is always a blessing. And thank you for modeling exactly what I'm writing about right here in this chat.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sharon. And Dania's here actually with her mom and brother. They're all here as they're still inside of their shloshim from for their dad. So it's good to have you all here. Um, one of the things that I find really amazing is that you learn this text um, in rabbinical school, and then you were like, I have no idea what this is, and put it photocopy, put it on your Gemara, and then what is like 15 years later or whatever, you found it on the book. And I wonder, and there might not be an explanation, it's like, what is that? What was different? What was different for you when you learned it then? Or what was different when you found it that allowed you to see the teaching of this Mishnah to be so meaningful? Why then? Why didn't you understand it 15 years earlier?
I think a lot about that. I think I had not experienced enough life to actually understand this text. I knew enough to know that there was something there that was speaking to me, but I did not. I had lost friends. I had never been a nevela to that point. I wasn't an immediate mourner in my 20s. And, I had experienced loss in life, but not in a way that would awaken me.
Mm,
Um, you know, Rav Claudia and I met actually just a couple of years after your mother died so tragically, and you had a different experience of the world than I had at that age. And I saw you, and I saw the toll that that kind of loss takes on the soul. And also, I've told you this so many times. I mean, I felt like you were from such an early age were walking around with this neshama yetera, like you had this extra soul with you because you were carrying your mother with you wherever you went. And that loss wisens us, that kind of loss. And I think it took many years for me to both experience my own losses, but also to walk with many more people through their
mm,
own, and to help people navigate tragedy and love. I mean, to help people get married and to help people get divorced.
mhm. Oh, yeah.
To experience my own pregnancy losses and struggles with fertility, and then to have three babies, and like just live with that kind of life and death and love and loss. And then when I saw the text again, I have to say I immediately understood it. Immediately. I mean, it's like I saw it, I knew there was something there, I knew I didn't get it, I put it away, and then I rediscovered it 15 years later, and I thought, oh, of course, that's what's happening here. Because
Mm,
when we're in that kind of pain, we don't, something shifts in us that makes us fundamentally not recognize the experience that the other people are having. We're not aligned anymore. And we need to be seen still. We still need to be held and not abandoned. And, I've been so deep in this work now for the last couple of years, and I ask people all the time this really simple question, which is, like, has there been a time in your life when you really were in deep anguish and another person's presence really felt that really gave you solace or helped you heal or helped you even just feel like you could survive the dark of night? And I'm sure if I ask you right now, I will actually ask you to just sort of give me a nod or raise your hand if you think about when you've encountered one of those moments of the deep darkness. And was there somebody there with you, somebody who showed up? With a just sort of simple gesture of presence. And I see that none of you are taking me up on the request to raise your hand, but I think you probably have all, yeah, because I mean, you're also community people. You're people who are drawn to community, like I am. And part of that is an awareness that we can't navigate the most difficult moments alone, and we shouldn't have to. And there's a midrash that I speak about in one of the early chapters of the book about Adam and Eve at the end of the first day of creation. And, they spent this whole magical, beautiful day together, but the day ends with sunset. We know that that's the way of the world, but Adam didn't know that. And so when it starts to get dark, he starts to get really scared. And the rabbis say that as the darkness descends, he starts cry, and then he starts to wail and he's screaming, and he does these two things that we do as human beings when the darkness comes. One, he blames himself and he says, "What did I do wrong? How did I make this happen? Because of me, this horror has fallen upon the earth." And the other thing he does is he catastrophizes, which is something I like to do as a spiritual practice. And he catastrophizes and he says, "This is the end of the world." He doesn't think this is the end of the day. He thinks it's the end of the world. And I think we do that when the pain comes. We often think, like, I can't imagine that there will ever be any kind of future beyond the darkness that I'm in right now. And what's amazing about the Midrash is that it then has Eve, his partner, come and sit down keneged lo, right across from him. And she just weeps with him and holds him throughout the night. And I just love it so much because she doesn't say to him, "Adam, it's not your fault." She doesn't know. Maybe it is his fault. And she doesn't say to him, "Adam, it's going to be okay. The sun's going to come up tomorrow," because she doesn't know. And maybe the sun will not come up tomorrow. What she does is she weeps with him and she holds him. And I often think about how scary that must have been for her because he's crying first. And she must have been terrified by Adam's tears. And yet she went to where he was and she allowed herself to go into the darkness with him and just to sit with him until the new dawn emerged. And I think the question we have to ask ourselves really, again and again in life is if the way of the world is for there to be darkness and and there to be light, so who's going to sit with us through the darkness? Not who's going to fix us and make it better and tell us that it's going to be okay, but who's just going to sit with us and navigate the darkness with us. And so we all have moments where people have come to us in the dark of night and sat with us, not all of us, but most of the people here. And I'm sure that we've all also had moments where someone's absence really stung in a moment that was really hard. The other day someone came to me and she said, "I have to say, I was so hurt." She said, "A bunch of people that really needed showed up at the shiva, but they didn't come to the funeral. And I felt the absence at the funeral. I felt their absence." And she said, they gave all kinds of reasons why they couldn't be there, but I felt like none of the reasons could fill the hole. Now, look, some people don't feel that way. I mean, I felt when people didn't come to my father's funeral. He died just a year and a half ago, and the people who didn't come, I felt like I'm so grateful, that you came to a night of ship. Like I didn't feel that way because I had lots of other people that were at the funeral, but I will say that I remember so profoundly and so closely the moment of at my father's funeral when I don't remember much of the funeral itself, but I remember at the burial. I remember that the family went forward first and we placed earth on his coffin. And my mother, who's been married to him for, since 1969, she didn't want to go sit under the tent where there was some shade structure. She couldn't be away from him. And so we ran and brought a chair and she sat down right by the edge of the grave. And so all the kids sat down and then all the grandkids, and we were just singing El Nora Alila from Ne'ilah. We were singing and singing and singing as the burial took place. And at some point I looked up and I saw a line of like 200 or 300 people waiting to place earth on my father's coffin. And I just couldn't believe it. And there were people there who I hadn't seen in a really long time, who like people who used to work at Ikar, people who I knew from college. I mean, and I just thought like I couldn't believe the gift that they gave me with their presence. And so one of the things I want to ask us to think about, and maybe it will come up with Rav Claudia, is if we know the impact of people showing up, and we also know how much it hurts when people don't show up. So what keeps us from showing up for one another? Um, when we know that the other needs us. And I think there are really good reasons why we stay away, and there are better reasons to show up. We can talk about that more afterwards if people
Yeah.
are interested.
So I want to ask, I want to take it from here because one of the things you speak about is you talk about obligation, and in our culture, we're not so we tend to not be very. So if you feel like you challenge, and I think our tradition challenges too. That's the meaning of mitzvah, of this idea that we have an obligation, a commitment to show for each other. And I often don't understand why this message, which you have been teaching and talking about so much, and I try to teach and talk about, is so radical. Why, in the times we are living now in this country, uh, specifically now, but in general, in a world of so much loneliness, why showing up for each other
Mhm.
such a radical message, or why the idea that that is something we have to do, we don't do it only when we feel like, but it is
Mhm.
a commitment we have to do, we are obligated. And again, I think that I actually love the word obligation, but I know that it's a word that people, in progressive liberal, not traditional Orthodox community, we try not to use it too much. We expect, we hope, maybe we encourage. That's what we encourage you, but we are careful to say we actually expect you to do this. So why is such a radical message and such an urgent message, especially?
Mhm. So that's a great question. And I think I want to answer by referencing something that Daniel wrote here about, you said, people told me when my father died that they didn't come to the Shiva because they assumed a lot of people would be there. And so I just give me a moment to kind of frame my response to you, which is, I said there are lots of good reasons why people don't show up. One of them is we assume that there are going to be a lot of people there, especially if it's someone who's really well known and has a lot of people in their circle or in their community. And I've been many times in those environments and been shocked to see how few people are there because they think that everyone else is going to be there. Right. And so this is a big mistake that we made. I talked in the book about Marcelo, our beloved Marcelo, whom Claudia and I share as a great,
But I know him for longer than you.
but
I'm
you know
sorry.
him for longer and he loves you more. But he loves us both. So
That's just-
Marcelo,
He
who,
called us, we are his rabbis, the two of us. That's what he
oh,
does every time he sees
okay.
us.
So so Marcelo, when his mother died, he was in New York and I was in Los Angeles, and I, I really thought Marcelo is one of the most beloved rabbis in the country, and I mean, there are going to be thousands of people there. Claudia's going to take the train down. The whole congregation, this huge congregation, everyone's going to be there. And so I wrote him a letter, which I still think is a really nice thing to do when somebody dies, is to write them a letter and send it. But what I didn't do was I didn't pick up the phone and call him. I didn't fly in. And when I saw him some months later, he came over to me and he said, I needed you and you weren't there for me. And it hurt. And he said, next time you show up. And I was so upset. And I mean, honestly, I felt like I still feel the heat in my body from that comment. And I thought, like, I have little children and I live in Los Angeles and my carbon footprint and blah, I had 100 excuses and they were all good ones. But I realized, I could either be defensive or I could make this the most important lesson of my life. And I just decided to do that. And so I realized, like, okay, if you can get there, get there. And if you can't get there, pick up the phone because there probably was some part of me that didn't call, not only because I thought he was overwhelmed, but because, and, I really didn't want to be in imposition, but also because I was scared of death, you know? I was scared to get too close in that moment, I'm sure, on some level. So I think one of the pieces is, we assume that other people will be there. One of the pieces is because it's just terrifying and we don't want to screw it up. We don't want to say the wrong things. We can say the wrong things. People often tell me the wrong things that others say to them when they say, things to them like, God only gives you what you can handle, those kinds of things. And like, he's in a better place now, kind of thing, which might be comforting to some people, but isn't comforting to everybody. And if you don't know that it's going to be comforting to the person who receives it, you shouldn't say it. But I think in general, the fear of saying the wrong thing it's not a good enough reason to keep us away. Because what really matters is not even the words we're saying, but it's the fact of our presence there that matters. And I think one of the scariest things about loss, and one of the biggest reasons that people stay away, is because we fear that loss is contagious. We think divorce is contagious. We think that tragedy is contagious. And so we're afraid that if I get too close to your loss, I will have to contemplate experiencing a loss like that myself, and I can't deal with it. If we're honest, I think that that's something a lot of us feel. And what we end up doing is abandoning people who are in the grips of loss to now experience loneliness on top of grief. And so so I think we have good reasons why we stay away. And yet none of them are good enough. And I also think, frankly, that in our time, there are a lot of very powerful forces that are conspiring to make us feel powerless. Um, and that powerlessness is real. I mean, I know I am some of my most beloved friends and family don't want to get up off the couch because it's too painful to just be in the world right now. It's very hard to get out of bed in the morning. And so, what this does is it actually takes away the choice. It's an obligation, it's not a choice. Our tradition says you show up. So, the morning after my kid became bat mitzvah, I had to bury my best friend's, one of my closest friends' fathers. And so that morning, Sunday morning, I woke her up and I said, "You're bat mitzvah now. Come with me. We're going to the funeral. Like, this is what we do." And she's like, "I'm tired." And it's my bat mitzvah weekend. I'm like, "Okay, but this is what it means to be bat mitzvah." So we take the guessing out of it. I feel scared. I feel worried. I'm afraid it's contagious. It doesn't matter. You go anyway. And when what happens when we go is we respond to that overwhelming, like that cloud of powerlessness by saying, "Oh, I'm not actually powerless. I might not be able to respond to the threat to federal workers in the last 2 months, but I can bring lasagna to my neighbor." And what that does is it reminds me that I can't solve every problem that we're facing, but I'm also not powerless to face everything. There are things that I can do and that we can do. And so now maybe we can begin to strategize about some of the other things that we're feeling powerless about and what can we do about them. So I think the notion of obligation actually is really critical to showing up because it's not just what we do when it's convenient. It's most meaningful when we go when it's inconvenient, right? Like those days where you have too much work and you have to cancel 6 meetings in order to get over there, but you go anyway, not just to the funeral, but also to the bat mitzvah. That's when you're really like, wow, I just helped somebody celebrate and that means something to me, or I helped somebody grieve. And so it doesn't only help the other person, it actually helps us too, because we're able to be part of that beautiful circle of shared responsibility.
It reminds me, and I can't recall if you quoted, but it reminds me the teaching of Gadol HaMetzuveh Ve'oseh, that it's greater the person who is obligated to something and
Yeah.
does it because it's obligated than the person who does something because just they feel like. And I often teach this to the mitzvah students, and I have this memory of the kids. And then I have a feeling that one of your children were in that class, like because it was on the third floor. I have a vision, it might be just my imagination, so it was many years ago, but that I was teaching that. And I asked the question, and the kids were saying, "But it's better if I clean my room because I feel like, not because my parents said so." So I said, "Okay, let's push that example. If you only clean your room, or if you only give tzedakah when you feel like, but for the next 3 months, you stop giving tzedakah because you don't feel like, or you stop cleaning your room." That spoke to them a little more because you don't feel like. What happens? You don't have a practice. And I think this idea that it's so counterintuitive to our society. And I think it was Mishi that wrote, yes, that in this country, we talk much more about our rights than our responsibilities. So then when we help, when we do, it's just a right, it's just a good thing to do. And what you are pushing us, and our tradition is so centered in our tradition, is that it's not because I feel like. I don't do mitzvot, I don't show up, I don't participate, I am not doing all these things that I'm supposed to do just because it makes me feel good. but because I am obligated, I'm part of a society, of a system that expects this
Right.
from me. And it's incredible counterintuitive to this society that we live right now. And I think it's
Yeah.
important to say that. Yeah.
What I also will say in the Orthodox community, they do this. I mean, and they do this really well. And I
Yeah.
mean, they live in that countercultural way. We have a member of the community who's comes from the Orthodox world and is now an Ikar member. And when her father died, we showed up at the house. And it was that night, the night of the death. And I went there to be with her and support her and start talk about the preparation for the funeral. And already her freezer was full. People had just come in all day long, bringing and delivering food. And I thought, oh my God, how'd they do this? Like the announcement had barely gone out, and already people were like, you are our responsibility. We're here to we're here to take care of you. So how in non-Orthodox environments do we help people understand how absolutely central this is? And for me, Claudia, you said something very similar about TBZ and Ikar, which are like sort of sister communities in many ways, and we should spend more time together as
We
communities.
should.
But one of the things that our community was started, and your community is driven by this deep commitment to building a more just and loving society. And I mean, this is in our original mission statement in 2004 when we launched. And I spoke a lot about the beloved community, about Dr. King's vision of a beloved community and what it means to really envision and then work to realize a society in which every human being is treated with full dignity. And I had this realization around the time of the Amen Effect sermon, which I feel even more deeply now, that we have no right to be out there preaching about building a beloved community if we aren't building a beloved community internally. Are we not treating each other with love and with care? And the civil rights movement, the movement for justice for Black Americans, it was a Black church movement. It was a movement that was rooted in faith, and it was rooted in faith community, really. I mean, those great famous speeches of the civil rights movement were given in church on Sunday morning. And so, what I think the aspiration was and needs to be was to build communities of sacred care and concern for each other that reverberate out and transform the world. And I'm not saying, focus on this and not that, or that and not this. I'm saying we have to do both. And to my great embarrassment, I had never given a sermon about going to Shiva for 10 years. I mean, I spoke every Shabbos for 10 years. I gave, 500 sermons at that point. And I had never said to people, this really matters. We got to show up for each other. And while some people instinctively did it, I never spoke about it as a kind of obligation. And then I realized it's all connected, that if we want to build that there, we start by showing up at Shiva and treating each other with love and care. And I mean, I really believe this all the more so now in this time of so much cruelty and callousness and harshness, that we need to turn to each other with tenderness, that we practice the tenderness we want to see out in the world with each other. We practice it by being more compassionate toward one another, being more curious about one another. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that as
No,
we.
and this is exactly the question I had next, which is this, showing up for our community, our elders, our sick people, our mourners, versus showing up for the other, for the immigrant and for the marginalized and for those outside our community, for the, and it was a couple of months ago, a few months ago, that we sent an email. Which we were trying to do less email, which is a problem, I think, for all our communities, that we do too many emails. So we did an email with two parts, which was about we needed volunteers, and half of the page of the email was for our revamping our Chesed committee, our Chesed group, which does all the internal coming into community work. It was, more people to volunteer to visit the sick and do the Shiva. And we're trying to create a new system to help people that are in chronic pain and rights to shul and rights to doctor's orders. So that was the Chesed. And the second part of the email was to ask for more volunteers for our immigration work that we have. We have a strong immigration work with asylum seekers that we are helping and supporting, that we are really helping them here in Boston, several families. So we send that email with the two parts, right? And several people are like, how do I choose? I have limit time. I have limit capacity. I have my kids, my work, etc. And you're telling me these two things are the most important things I have to do. I can do both. Do I visit the sick shul? Do I go to the shiva? Do I make that soup for my neighbor? Or do I go now to that rally that you want me to go, or to? So it's not an easy answer, but like if you can go further, you already started, but to talk about the relationship with these two kinds of showing up, and in a way, maybe I'm taking it a little bit out of this context. If you feel like, I think that also talks about us, me versus you, us versus the other, which perhaps enters also question in the time that we are living about tribalism, and on our own list, we have to take care of the Jews, but we don't take care of the others. How do we navigate this, which is complicated, so clear and so complicated?
Yeah. Okay, this is so, I mean, it is so complicated. I don't want to give a facile answer here, but I will say, I think that we have to do all of the work, and not every person has to do all of the work. Not any one person can do all of the work. And that's part of the reason that we enter community, because there are people who are in a Bargello circle at Ikar, and they made this gorgeous wimple for the Torah that we needed, and I could never do that. And you know, that's their contribution to the community, right? There are people who feel really dry. I also, you don't want my lasagna. So there are people who are very good at lasagna and very good at Bargello, and they should do that work to help strengthen and give love to the community. And there are people who are really drawn to the street and drawn to the strategizing and thinking about what can we do to help protect the people who are most vulnerable in this country now, right now. And so I think all of the work has to be done, but when you're in a community, not any one person has to hold the burden of needing to do all of it at once. And there are at different moments in our lives we feel able, like I have enough in me right now to do this versus to do that, to go to this conference and speak on this panel and write an op-ed and try to organize a petition. Or, I can't, my heart is not calling me to that right now. But today I really can call some elders who are homebound and who haven't heard from anyone in a while and give them love. So I think the idea is developing an orientation toward a just and loving community and society, and then joining with other people who are part of building toward that society, and knowing that it's okay. We don't have to do everything. We have to do something. When we were starting, we many years ago wanted to build an early childhood center for Ikar. And my partner in building Ikar, Melissa Balaban, and I were both reading Nick Kristof and Cheryl Woodan's book, Half the Sky, about women in the developing world. And they spoke about how literacy in the developing world is a life or death prospect. So the girls who can read will most likely survive. The girls who cannot read will not. And it was devastating. I mean, just because the girls who can't read are much more likely to be sold into slavery, sold into brothels, taken advantage of, engaged, they're harmed in really unthinkable ways. And so we realized that we wanted to build an early childhood center here in LA, but if we didn't, LA would be fine. There are lots of early childhood centers in LA, but in the developing world, it wasn't a luxury. It was actually a necessity. And so we wanted to build a sister school. We were going to build two schools at once. So we created this matrix and we started doing research to figure out where should we plant our second school. And the more we researched, the longer the document got and the scarier the document got. And we realized there was so much need in so many places that we just literally almost said, we just aren't going to do the project because like once you see the vastness of the problem, you have this psychic numbing that that we know about compassion fatigue. Like I will never be able to solve the problem, so I'm just going to shut down. And one of the pieces of advice that Christoph and Wudun offer in their book is you can't do everything. So just do something. And I just feel like that's the best response, especially in this time. We can't shut down. We can't afford to shut down. We need each other. And we also need people who are part of community thinking strategically about how we navigate this storm. And if we pull ourselves away and try to just escape the reality because we're too overwhelmed by what's going on, then it's only going to magnify the pain that we're already feeling and that our neighbors and others in the society are feeling. Now, you also mentioned the idea of of tribalism. And so I want to speak to that for a moment, so in chapter 8 of the book, I share that. So the first 7 chapters are all about the person who comes in and turns to the left is a bereft or bereaved or ill person. I extrapolate from Avel, from the mourner, to mean anybody who's brokenhearted. But in the last chapter, and I talk about how important it is to show up for celebration and for sorrow. And we talk about joy a lot, which maybe we'll get to in this conversation in the next 13 minutes or so. But in the last chapter, I share that in the Mishnah, they actually give 2 examples of people who turn to the left. It's not only the Avel, the mourner, who turns to the left, but it's also the Menudeh. And the Menudeh is this very specific category in the ancient world of a person who has been ostracized. They were ostracized from the community because they caused harm to individuals in the community or to the community as a whole. And when you're ostracized, you do not join the book group Zoom with your rabbi and your community. You don't go to Shabbos dinner. You don't engage in business with this person. They're essentially excluded from the community. It's one stop short of excommunication. But on those sacred days, the Menudeh, this ostracized one, goes up to the Temple Mount and they enter through the same entryway and they turn to the left like the bereaved. And they are met by the people who are circling to the right, who ask them, Malach, tell me about your heart. What happened to you? And they answer saying, I've been ostracized from this community because I've hurt people here. And the answer is not that we run away from them or curse at them or yell at them or tell them how hurt we've been by their behavior. We bless them. We say to them something like, may the one who dwells in this place help your community see your humanity so that you can be welcomed back into the fold. Or may the one may the one who dwells in this place open your heart so that you realize how you've hurt the community and you can one day be welcomed back with love. But either way, they get a blessing. And so I read from that the ancient wisdom is not only that we need to learn how to turn toward each other with compassion when we see that when one of us is in pain, and not only that we have to make ourselves vulnerable when we're the ones in pain, but that we have to learn how to turn not only toward the people who are coming toward us with broken hearts, but the people who are coming at us, people who have really harmed us. And I have a few, and I imagine that I'm not the only one on this Zoom who's had my heart broken by people who I really loved and trusted, especially in the last year and a half. I mean, we're breaking. Our families are breaking. Our communities are breaking. Our coalitions for racial and economic justice are breaking. We're breaking. And so we have people who have posted things, who have said things, who have written things that really hurt us. And what the tradition seems to me to be saying is every bone in your body is saying, retreat, retreat, retreat. Turn away from this person. And yet, what you are called to do is turn toward them instead, and to turn toward them not only with compassion in your heart, but with genuine curiosity. So when we see somebody who has said or written or done something that hurts us, we have to assess, will I be safe if I engage in this encounter? Because we have to distinguish between being safe, being unsafe, and being uncomfortable. And if we can be safe, actually asking with real curiosity, tell me about your heart. What do you see? What does the, because I'm walking this way and you're walking this way, we see totally different things. What does the world look like from your vantage point? And that's super hard. And we don't want to do that. We don't want to see the people who are coming from the other direction. We want to be seen by them, but we don't want to see them.
Yeah, I think this distinction between being uncomfortable and not safe, it's such an important. You mentioned in that chapter 8, you that you learned from Reverend Ed Bacon about being a victim, hero, or learner. I found that so profound. Can you say a little
Yeah.
about that? Yeah.
Yes, this is one of my beloved, my one of my beloved friends, who's now down in Birmingham, Alabama, and he learned and then taught that for every experience you have in your life, you have the agency to choose afterwards if you will be the victim of that story, the hero of that story, or if you will be a learner from that story. So, for example, imagine that you are traveling and you get off the plane and you realize that they have lost your luggage, right? Again. So the victim version is you finally make it to where you're going and you tell your beloveds, like, I can't believe they lost my luggage again. Why does this always happen to me? Everybody else got their luggage, but I didn't get my luggage. What's wrong? Why am I the one who now has to go through, and like buy new clothes for the conference that I'm going to? It's so unfair. The hero version of that story is they lost my luggage and I calmly went over to the United desk and I said, "My luggage is lost. Here's my phone number. Please get this to me as soon as possible." And I kept my cool and I went to the conference wearing my airplane clothes and I was fine, right? The learner version of that is, this has happened to me 3 times. I'm going to try to fit in carry-on next time I travel, right? Like I'm not using luggage anymore. It doesn't really work for me. And so I think about that. It's kind of a silly example, but I started to take in, because you might not know this, but sometimes people project a lot of dark stuff at their rabbis and
Really? I did not know
and
that.
aren't always on their best behavior when they talk to us. And so I found in myself that I was making myself a victim or a hero all the time. Like, I can't believe this guy. I've given him so much. I didn't go to my own kid's baseball game because I went to his kid's baby naming and then he spoke to me like that and I'm the victim. Or I'm the hero and I'm like, I am such a holy person because this person behaved so badly and I just kept my cool, And then the learner version is, I wonder what's going on for this guy. Why would he speak to me like this? Where is that pain coming from? And so I have taken Reverend Bacon's, I almost called him Rabbi Bacon, which would be a great name for a rabbi. I've taken Reverend Bacon's wisdom into my heart again and again, and I have to constantly remind myself that it's not a gift to the other person that I'm trying to be a learner here. It's really a gift to myself and my family, right? And my loved ones, that I just don't want to be your victim anymore. So you're going to behave the way you're going to behave. But as I write in the book, I had this image that like a screen would come down right in the middle of my office, in between the person and me. And then I would imagine that I'm watching this person in a documentary about the way that hurt people hurt people. And this person is projecting their anger at their wonderful rabbi who does not deserve it. And I'm, as a viewer, trying to understand why. And so what I got from that little exercise is enough distance so that I don't feel like I'm not burning up anymore and I don't feel defensive anymore. But for a moment, I'm like, I wonder what is actually going on there. What's the story behind the story? And how can I respond to them as a person who's gone through immense pain? And one of the people who I, write about in the book, as soon as I created that little bit of distance from this person, I was able to actually ask the right kinds of questions, because you're not curious when you're under attack. You're only curious when you feel safe enough to be curious. And I was able to ask the right questions that actually unlocked something. And I was able to grow to understand exactly what had gone on for this person and why she was so filled with rage toward me, which wasn't actually, believe it or not, it wasn't actually about me. It was about her, right?
Yeah. So I'm going to take us to chapter 5 for a second, which is grieve and leave, which this amazing midrash, which I won't get into it, but it's about Rabbi Yeshua says you must mourn, but not too much, and there are so many examples in our tradition about that. And I want to ask you from this idea that we must mourn, but not too much. How do we apply that today? I met on Wednesday, that was yesterday, with a congregant who wanted to share with me how much rage he feels right now for what's going on in this country. He's been helping an immigrant from Haiti and learn about TPS ending, and he was so enraged. He was like, I don't know what to do with my anger. So kind of moving the question of like there is boundaries to our grief, and we have to move from grief to life, to joy, also to today, how we apply this today, where we wake up every day. I'm we I do, you do, so many of us do, every day with so much despair, so much grief, so much anger and rage. And then I still have to, take my kid to this, and they make a joke. Like life keeps going, and sweet things still happening, and the beauty of the world is out there. So how do we grieve and live? How do we hold anger and move on? And what do we do with this anger, with this grief, with this rage that it's happening around us in ways that it almost feels like it's not ending, and it's so horrible.
So so many things to talk about here, and I know we only have a couple of minutes. The first thing that I think of when you ask this question is something that I learned from Rachel Naomi Remen in her book Kitchen Table Wisdom years and years ago. If you haven't read it, it's so beautiful. I think Mayan read that book, or right. There's this book talks about how she was one of the leaders in kind of mind body connection, and how we don't need only cures, we need also to heal, and that's a spiritual journey. So she writes about how she was diagnosed with Crohn's disease when she was a teenager, and she was really suffering. And she one day was walking down the street in New York City, and she saw on the sidewalk, the cement sidewalk, two blades of grass that stuck out in between these two slabs of cement. And she was just staring at it. She's like, what makes grass grow through the cement in New York City? And she realized the life force that was necessary in order for those blades of grass to poke their way. They must have been searching for a way out, and like how ferociously they needed life, that they were willing to push through the cement like that, or push through the crack in the cement. And so she talks about anger as a righteous expression of a will for the world to be different than it is. And I think about that all the time, that sometimes we can be drowned in our anger. We're so full of rage that we just don't even want to live anymore. And sometimes anger can be a righteous expression of the fact that the world is not what it should be and what it must be. And I think when we feel the first kind of rage, we have to invite ourselves tenderly into the second kind of rage, because the second kind of rage is productive and constructive. And the first kind is very destructive. It will destroy our souls, it will destroy our spirits. And so the first thing is learning how to use our anger, how to harness anger into a sense of agency that can actually help guide us toward the greater good. But the second thing I want to say is that I heard Father Greg Boyle speak just last week, and if you don't know his work, he writes this book called Tattoos on the Heart. He's written many books, but that was his first one. He built Homeboy Industries here, where he takes homies. He takes guys who were in prison for committing violent crimes, who were drug addicted, and he built this center to essentially rehabilitate them with love, and a sense that they were created in God's image. And it's extraordinary. And all now our whole maintenance team are homies, and they're all people who've kind of gone through Father Greg's program, and they're incredible. And so Father Greg said the other day something so beautiful. He said, we keep talking about how polarized we are and how divided we are. He said, but what we really are is we are caught in the grips of a great anguish. And the only response to great anguish, the only way to soothe an anguish is through tenderness. And so part of what we have to do is move from destructive to constructive rage. And part of what we have to do is allow that rage to be transformed through tenderness into acts of love and care for each other. And I believe that one of the ways that we do that transformative work is through making space for art, for joy, for beauty. I am not a go tend your own garden kind of rabbi, because I feel like sometimes that can be an excuse. And also sometimes we need to tend our own gardens. We actually need, I mean, for me now I have a pottery practice, and Claudia knows if I don't get my hands on in the clay for at least like an hour or two a week, I'm off. I'm all in. There's a disequilibrium from the outset. And so I don't, when I say I'm not a tend your own garden rabbi, what I mean is yes, and not only that, but also that. And I think sometimes when we're so full of rage and a sense of impotence, we have to we have to actively bring love and joy and art and beauty back into our lives, because joy and art and beauty are not luxury items. They are spiritual necessities. We need them in order to stay alive. And I have, there's a conversation that I always run through in my head that I had with bereaved parents who lost their child to suicide. And they, after many, many months in just the deepest darkness, they went away for the weekend with friends, and they experienced joy. They just laughed with old friends. And then they felt so guilty that they felt joy again. And I was talking to them afterwards, saying to them, this is the guilt is not helpful for you here. Joy is not because you were escaping the grief. Joy is an expression of your broken heart. And it's an expression that your soul needed in order to feel fully human after experiencing this terrible loss. And so I think part of this is learning how to hold anger in a good and productive way. And part of it is learning how to soften anger by also inviting into our hearts a little bit more spaciousness, where we can also experience what's beautiful in this world, where the blessings are in this world, because there are so many. By the way, I think this community is part of the blessings of the world.
I have one last question before
Yeah,
you. Do you have time for one more
yeah,
question?
yeah, yeah.
All right. So I heard you share in one of your book launch that I saw uh, that you actually, when you did the launching of your book at ICAR in person with your community, hundreds of people, you actually did the ritual itself of the Mishnah, which I like. I wish I was there. I just can't imagine like you. And I wish we could do it on Zoom, but we can't do it on Zoom. But I was just so touched by the idea of imagining your community. And I've been there doing the ritual itself. And this was not long after your father died. So you were part of the ones going the other way around, and people saying to you, Malach, and people blessing you. I would like to hear your experience of this
Yeah.
as you did this with your community as a mourner, and what this practice meant to you, what opened in your heart and the hearts of the people who were there with you.
Yeah, it was an absolutely incredible experience, and maybe you'll try it at TBZ. I
Yeah,
mean, you're right. This is one thing you need to have you need to be in person for,
yeah.
but literally I invited everyone to stand up, and I said, if you're okay today, none of us are really okay right now. But if you have some strength in you, I want to just invite you to go to the wall and start to walk in that direction. And if you're like me and you're brokenhearted right now, if you're experiencing if you're grieving the death of a loved one, you're experiencing a loss. So then I want to invite you to walk in the other direction, and we're going to actually have the encounter. And I think there were maybe 700 people in the room. I think 650 of them went the way of the people who are okay, which I was heartened by, because also it was after October 7th. I mean, everyone was not okay in some way. Now we're also not okay in other ways. I mean, but they realized that even though they weren't okay, they were better than, than others in the room. And 50 of us walked the other way. And I had strangers, people who were there that night who I'd never met in my life, who were not part of our community, who encountered me as we were as we were passing by, and said, Malach, tell me about your heart. And I answered and said, well, my father died, and then my book came out, and then October 7th happened, and then the book came out, and I've just been in this whirlwind, and I just miss him a lot. And um and they blessed me. I asked them to come up with their own words of blessing, because the fact is, like, the people who used to go up to the Temple Mount, they didn't go there to get blessed by the Kohanim, by the priests, and they didn't go to get blessed by the rabbis. They went to get blessed by each other. They went to get blessed by each other. And so I ask people to say the words of blessing. You start with, I bless you that, and then just say something like that you're not alone as you go through this time of hardship, something like that. And everybody has the power to bless. And I was a wreck. I mean, I was just bawling, and strangers blessing me and asking me and looking in my eyes and saying, tell me about your heart. And it was incredibly meaningful and beautiful. And so I also, I'm going to just say one last thing, which is, you don't have to do it in the circle format and in a giant space. I went to University of Michigan at one point when I was giving a talk in Ann Arbor, and I sat in a room with 15 student leaders who were really brokenhearted by what was going on campus. And I asked the group sitting together to, I turn to somebody in the room and say to them, Malach. And then that person had to answer honestly, and the person who asked would give a blessing. And then that person would turn to someone else. And so we did this for each other in the room. And we spent the whole 2 hours just doing that exercise. And it was incredible. Then we did it at a board meeting that I had. I mean, this exercise, because the idea is so powerful. And it's because the ancients knew what they were talking about. And this has been around for 2,000 years. The idea of being seen when you are brokenhearted brings a kind of solace that we need in our hearts and that we need in our souls. So, and the idea that each one of us can bless each other with that kind of presence is also so very powerful. So thank you for asking about it. And if you do it, let me know.
I will.
I would
I
love to
will.
know. And
Yeah.
if any of you are ever in LA, come visit us and tell me you come from Rav Claudia's shul, and I will feed you.
Gary's his brother is a member of your show. As you probably
Oh,
met, Gary comes and visits.
hi,
When
Gary.
so it's great. So I want to say for everybody, at the end of the book, there is a chapter called Practice. Here you can see. And those who know me know that practice is one of my favorite and more used words, because I think everything needs to be a practice. And Rabbi Brous really offers different practices that are really daily practices that we can take. So I really invite you to look into it. And to finish, I would love if people can put in the chat a word, something that you're feeling right now, that you want to just share as a goodbye, either to Sharon, either to our community, or just a word that we can hold, because we're recording, we will have all these comments and questions and words, and I'll think about doing something with it. Thank you, Rabbi Sharon Brous, my dear, dear friend and Chavruta. It's really, really an honor to be with you. I feel like it's so nice to introduce you to my community and my people and my Chavre, and for us to be together here. And I know I'll see you really, really soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rabbi Kreiman. And you have the best rabbi. You're the luckiest. So thank you all for being together.
Okay.
I'm so touched that you're all here.
Okay. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good night and see you on Shabbos. Okay. Take care, everybody. I'll wait one more minute for all the comments and then I'll end the meeting. Thank you all. Laila Tov.